Something big is breaking inside Iran, and the strongest sign doesn't just come from the streets, nor from military threats. It comes from the very propaganda machine that has supported the Islamic Republic for decades. This Friday, May 1st, 2026, the crisis is hitting hard in Tehran. The rial is sinking, food is getting more expensive, state media is criticizing the government, and outlets connected to the regime itself are starting to attack each other in public. For a long time, the Iranian regime controlled almost everything the population could see and hear. Television, newspapers, news agencies, religious channels, and part of the internet protected the official version. The leadership said what people were allowed to know, who the enemy was, and how each crisis should be explained. But now, that wall is starting to crack because the economic crisis has reached the center of everyday life. I'll tell you all about it in a moment, but right now, you'll want to be subscribed to the channel to stay well informed. Real-time information with the highest journalistic standards and unmatched credibility. Milson Alves. The most sensitive point is the currency. The dollar is now worth about 1.8 million reais according to information circulating in the international news. On paper, this makes anyone with dollars a millionaire in Iran. In real life, it means loss of value, a more expensive market, and salaries melting away. The population. You don't measure a crisis by political speeches. You measure it by the price of eggs, bread, rice, medicine, and transportation. In Tehran, reports indicate that an egg can cost close to 1 million reais, while a hamburger can go for over 5 million reais. At the same time, a significant part of the population lives on a monthly income of around 200 million reais. The number seems high, but inflation eats it all up. When the basics go up at this rate, propaganda loses its power. People may even hear the government blame external enemies, but they see the collapse when they go to the market. The crisis gets even worse because much of the food consumed in Iran is imported. Estimates cited by experts indicate that somewhere between 50% and 70% of the food comes from abroad. With a weak currency, imported products become more expensive. The merchant pays, passes the cost on, and the average family cuts back on consumption. Even if external pressure decreases, the damage to purchasing power doesn't disappear quickly. It's in this environment that the state media began to show unusual signs of wear. Anchors and voices connected to the system started demanding explanations about inflation, prices, and lack of control. This doesn't mean a free press. It means that groups within the power structure itself are using television and newspapers to shift the blame to internal rivals. The regime tries to show unity, but its own outlets already reveal division. The clearest fight appears between outlets like Tasnim News and Raja News. Both are connected to the regime's side, but they advocate different paths. Tasnim appears closer to sectors that accept negotiations with the United States to avoid a new open war. Raja News represents a tougher line, aligned with groups that reject concessions and treat any retreat as weakness. The dispute moved from behind the scenes to editorials and public attacks. This point is serious because it shows that the regime is not just discussing the economy, it's discussing survival. Part of the elite wants to negotiate to buy time, while another wants to toughen up to preserve the image of strength. Both options have a cost. If Tehran negotiates too much, it looks like it gave in to pressure. If it rejects everything, it increases the risk of sanctions, isolation, and military attack. At the center of this pressure is Ali Khamenei. The supreme leader still holds power, but the moment exposes a trust deficit at the top of the system. The recent war, the fall of the currency, and the debate over concessions have opened space for factions that are already thinking about the future of the regime. It's not an open rupture, but it's a visible crack for a system that survives on the appearance of cohesion. This is a hard blow. The pressure from the United States has added to this erosion. U.S. Central Command reportedly asked the Pentagon for access to the Dark Eagle hypersonic missile called Black Eagle here. This weapon has not yet been used in real combat and appears as a sign that Washington maintains a military option against Iranian targets. The message is direct. If Tehran uses negotiations only to buy time, it could move beyond diplomacy. This point affects the Iranian strategy. For years, the regime has used missiles, militias, threats in the Persian Gulf, and the nuclear program as bargaining chips. The logic was to create enough fear to extract concessions. Now the United States seems willing to turn the tables. The White House demands real limits on the nuclear program and does not accept an agreement that preserves its character. Para arma atômica. This negotiation has become a trap for Tehran. The Iranian government can offer some concessions, but it tries to keep its leverage. Trump made it clear that there will be no agreement if the regime insists on keeping room for a nuclear weapon. For Khamenei, accepting this would mean admitting a strategic defeat. However, refusing keeps the people in an economic crisis and increases the risk of new military action. The population pays the price of this dispute, while the elite debates how to preserve power. The ordinary citizen sees their salary lose value, the shopkeeper pays more, and families cut back on food. Young people look to the future and see blockade, censorship, and inflation. That's why the economic crisis in Iran is never just about the economy. It quickly turns into a political crisis. The regime knows this and responds with repression. According to Reuters, the UN stated that Iran has arrested more than 4,000 people since the beginning of the recent events involving Iran, the United States, and Israel. The charges are related to national security. In practice, Tehran is trying to prevent economic fear from turning into organized protest. Arrests, surveillance, and execution serve as a warning to anyone thinking of challenging the system. This method has been used before. In 2019, protests against rising fuel prices quickly grew and turned into a revolt against the regime. The crackdown was brutal. At the time, Reuters reported estimates of around 1,500 people killed in less than 2 weeks. The lesson was etched in Iran's ruling establishment. When prices rise too much, the streets can change their demands in just a few hours. Iran's history helps measure this risk. The 1979 revolution promised justice, independence, and dignity. Over time, the system concentrated power in the hands of religious leaders, security forces, and ideological groups. The government that claimed to speak for the people ended up creating a structure that fears its own population. Other nations show a similar pattern. The Soviet Union seemed strong on the outside, with propaganda, security services, and rhetoric of greatness. But the weak economy, the war in Afghanistan, and internal divisions eroded the system. The logic repeats itself when the government loses control over everyday life. It also loses part of its control over the narrative. In today's Iran, the cracks are showing on several fronts. At the same time, the currency loses value, food prices rise, state media demands answers, regime outlets fight among themselves, and the hardliners attack the negotiators. The negotiators fear a new war, and the United States maintains military pressure that could change Tehran's calculations. The Strait of Hormuz draws increased attention because it is vital for global energy trade. The regime tries to use this passage as a bargaining chip, but the threat is risky. If Tehran goes too far, it could provoke a stronger military response. If it backs down, it loses part of the image of resistance it has sold to its allies. The Iranian leadership still speaks of defiance. But internal signs tell a different story. Khamenei may maintain the rhetoric of control. However, the currency prices and disputes in the state media show signs of strain when allies start accusing each other in public. The crisis has already moved past the rumor stage. It has entered the phase of open dispute for influence, blame, and survival. In the end, Tehran faces 3 shocks at the same time: economic collapse, internal division, and external military threat. The regime still has the police, intelligence services, and prisons, but it can no longer hide everything. When the currency sinks, food prices skyrocket, and even the state media starts to split, the image of absolute control suffers a severe blow. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and at the end, check out the comments so you can be even more engaged with the community. Milson Alves.